Echo Discovery Fireside Chat. As most of you know, I'm Anne Simard. I'm the Director of Strategy and Translation at Transform HF. And with Soror and the TBEP team, we're very pleased to be sponsoring and supporting Echo Discovery. Today for our fireside chat, we took a little bit of a different approach than we have for the first two, where we welcome not only our 30 Echo Discovery participants, but we've also opened it up to the broader Transform and TBEP community. So you'll notice the room is a little more crowded than the last couple of times, but I think that'll make a rich dialogue. And without further explanation, apart from saying that Joe and Heather are very game today. So if you actually want to pose a question, we'll start the session. We'll do a little bit of back and forth amongst the three of us. We'll obviously monitor the chat, but just to make it maybe a little bit more engaging, if you'd like to actually pose your question, if you could please raise your hand, we will turn to you to get you to actually ask your questions so that we can hear some different voices in the room. And just, I'll give a little warning. We will try to focus on questions from our Echo Discovery participants because this fireside chat is in the context of their broader program, but welcome other folks too to add into the chat or to put up their hands. So without further ado, I'm super excited today to welcome Joe Cafazzo and Heather Ross, UHN's Inventors of the Year, which was a very nice moment last December where their, I guess, almost 10-year journey with Medly was recognized. And today we're going to hear about the Medly journey that has culminated in Medly Therapeutics, a UHN spin-off venture, and really trying to take what Joe and Heather have learned over the last decade at UHN and really think about bringing it worldwide. So I'll just take a quick moment and introduce you. So Joe Cafazzo is the founder of Healthcare Human Factors at UHN, and he holds the Wolford Chair in Digital Health. He's also UHN's Executive Director of Biomedical Engineering, and he's a senior scientist at the Center for Digital Therapeutics. He's part of Transform, and he's also a professor at IHPME and in the Institute of Biomaterials and Biomedical Engineering at U of T. So welcome, Joe. And his partner in crime on this Medly journey and today is Dr. Heather Ross, who I think many of you know is co-lead of Transform. She's the head of the Division of Cardiology at UHN and the Laura A. Rogers Chair in Heart Function. She's our site lead for the Ted Rogers Center and also a professor of medicine. And always like to remember that she's Order of Canada, which she got in 2021. So she's OC, not OG, but a little of both for today's conversation. So Joe and Heather and everyone, welcome to today, our fireside chat.
Thanks, Anne.
So just to get things started, because there's a good mixed audience here, some of whom know about Medly and both of you, and some of you don't. So let's start a little bit, in the beginning. Can you tell us a little bit about the origins of Medly and kind of how it all got started?
Okay, I want Heather to go first on this one.
He's gonna give me a hard time about this. So I think it was a bit of a perfect storm. We had been working on trying to figure out a way to manage patients without it requiring regular visits. And in the very early days, we used to just put a paper up on somebody's fridge, and whatever your weight was, you would go to look at that, and it would tell you what dose of diuretic to take. And then we had this crazy idea to use the internet, right? This internet thing. We created a website, heartfunction.com, which was run by a nurse practitioner, Jeannie Costigan, who's left the institution, but it was run by a nurse practitioner, and it was like the best failure ever. It took forever for patients to use it. They spent forever entering their information, and Janine just like lost her mind trying to actually review all of it. It was just truly an epic failure. And as our side on the clinical side was trying to think about how we could actually manage patients in a more intelligent and significant way, along came Joe and Emily Cito, who did her PhD on Medly, with this idea of using a phone to actually encapsulate what we do in the clinical environment into a phone-based app. And that really, to me, is how I remember the start. It was on Blackberries, of all things.
Yeah.
From our side, the original funding came from Test Your Limits, because it was, and Joe can speak to this, it was almost impossible to get this thing funded, this crazy idea of doing a phone. And, when you think about cardiology, all we do is use really fancy names for big studies of 5,000 patients. But the idea of using something small and disruptive, just unheard of.
Yeah, I mean, my recollection was that it was very much Emily looking, and I got to give Emily Cito a lot of credit, because back in those days, and we were using not only the BlackBerry, but the S60 Nokia phone to do hypertension management. And we did this big randomized trial with Sinai, and to our surprise, it really worked. And Emily was saying, like, if we could do this with hypertension and with diabetes, why couldn't we do more advanced, more difficult self-care? And she thought about heart failure in particular. And at that time, I actually had no context. I didn't know Heather. I knew of Heather, didn't know her personally. And I was just sort of asking around. And Heather's name did come up, but there's a lot of people, and I won't mention their names. He says, "Oh, you don't want to work with Heather. She's too busy. She'll be climbing a mountain somewhere." And I'm glad we didn't take that bad advice, because the tenacity and the personality of Heather was perfect for a technology partnership like this. And so Emily did in fact approach Heather, and that's how it started, because Heather, I think, was noodling on these ideas. We were looking at advancing this whole concept of patient self-care and management, and a prescribed application that would work with the clinic. And everything was started converging. And then, we have a PhD student who's full-time on this. It was meant to happen at that point.
So that world of kind of engineering and health human factors design coming together with the clinical expertise, you're kind of both talking about that.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk a little bit about how those were kind of some of the ingredients to the successful collaboration? And I imagine you both don't always speak the same language. So how do you kind of deal with kind of bumps and hiccups?
Well, I mean, the first thing I wanted to mention is that we're spoiled at UHN with this model of engineers and software developers working inside the hospital alongside, and having myself as an appointment with the university, as well as a clinical responsibility for medical engineering and the equipment. We have a group coming tomorrow from UC San Diego. We have a scientist from McGill here on a leave of absence to learn from the UHN model of how scientists and engineers are all co-located and working towards these technology problems, right? And so I'm so used to it, but for these other centers, McGill, San Diego, and others, they're searching for a method for better collaboration.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's true. I remember when the human health factors came down to clinic, and Mike Levis, and remembering Kevin Leonard, and some really incredible people at the start of the journey. And this idea that that they were, I mean, it was a bit novel to me. These engineers and developers were coming to watch how we did what we do. And to figure out ways and workflows and all this language that is commonplace now, but really wasn't when we got started. And I think, the thing that has allowed us to get over any bumps that have happened has been just this drive to change the patient experience. And when you're centered in something like that, that is your main goal, is to change the patient experience and change patient outcomes. And if that is your driver, then I think the hiccups and the bumps along the way end up getting resolved because you're so scope locked on the goal.
Can you talk a little bit about how Medly does meet that objectives? Because not everybody is very familiar, and just kind of how it's unique in the kind of remote patient management space. Just, I think that'd be helpful.
Sure. So there's a lot out there for remote patient monitoring, which is a passive flow of information from the patients to some place where the information is looked at. And in traditional telemonitoring that's been used, it's usually 40 or 50 patients looked after by a nurse who's actually not involved in the circle of care. And it takes time for the information to get back to the patient. And general telemonitoring only runs Monday to Friday during work hours. And one of the big problems that we wanted to address is the fact that patients don't know to get sick between Monday and Friday, 8 to 4. And as I always like to joke, if you're a Maple Leafs fan, it means you're probably eating the wrong things on Saturday night, because that's a bit of a challenge. And so patients get sick at on weekends and after hours, and trying to basically encapsulate how the heart failure clinical care, or so nurse practitioner, doc, encapsulate how they would manage the patient if the patient was in front of them in the moment. That's actually, in essence, what Medly does using an expert rules system. So taking the information that the patient enters, such as their heart rate, their blood pressure, their weight, and some symptom questions, into the app. What's in the app in the expert rules system is exactly how I would manage the patient if the patient was in front of me. So if that patient has gained some weight, what would I do if I saw that patient in front of me? I would ask them to take an additional dose of diuretic to get their weight back into the target range. And so this idea of pushing instructions, that it happens effectively in real time by people who are involved in the circle of care of the patient based on individual parameters for that patient that we dial in at the time that we onboard, makes it unique. It also is why it is a Class 2 Health Canada device. And Joe can speak to the engineering and the SAMD side of it.
I think that last bit, though, Heather, what you mentioned about the feedback, the instant feedback, and that's where value is derived. And there's in the digital health realm, for many years, and continuing in this this aspect, is that patients give a lot into these applications and they get nothing back. It's a bit of a paternalistic model where there's this expectation that you capture all this data and it goes back to the clinic, and eventually they will get back to you if there's any concern. And we kind of turned that on its head, and being respectful that patients have a great deal of agency if we give them half the chance. And they demonstrated it in the trials that have occurred, that they can self-manage and the families can be supportive of that individual. And so they're more than capable of following these instructions, and they get value out of it, and they continue to use it. And in many digital health trials, you have this, they suffer from rapid attrition, and it's largely because they're not seeing value out of it over time,
or being included as a partner, right, Joe? I mean, this is about this is a dyad, if you will, right? If you think about the traditional healthcare perspective, it's paternalistic. This is what you do, and just don't argue, just do it. This is actually about a patient being given the tools to manage their care, to understand why you're doing what you're doing. And that self-care and self-maintenance, self-management, those are really important skills, I think. And patients have demonstrated again and again, not only can they, but they want to, and they should. And I think that is something that Medly does, while providing that safety net of the clinical care coordinator, the nurse coordinator model, who can actually help the patient navigate their symptoms and the system if need be, right? So I think it is the coupling of taking how we manage patients and really enabling that patient's self-care together with a nurse-led model of care, which is also unique. And it's the two things coming together that I think create the secret sauce.
And over time, I think the other really valuable lesson here is that older adults can do this as well. And I think we were really determined to get that aspect of it, because everybody and continues to this day saying, well, you know, this is for younger patients and for tech savvy people. And that's a myth. And I appreciate the fact that, you know, from a technology perspective, we've met the patients and their families halfway in the clinic, people like Stella and so on, so being very supportive of the typically older and more frail patients, but they certainly can do it. And you know, it's been really gratifying to see that older patients can do this.
So Joe, there's actually a question in the chat from Nathan asking about that whole dynamic of including, and maybe if you think about this more from your side, the tech engineering side, you know, that idea of engaging patients or physicians in the initial stages of product design. Like, do you have some thoughts about the best way to do that?
Yeah, I mean, we follow what most other consumer industries follow, is user-centered design, and doing a lot of upfront, you know, formative design research, and not being very, and not trying to be presumptuous on what the needs are. We have some great advantages of being embedded. And, you know, through Healthcare Human Factors, we work with lots of industry companies and helping them bring their products to market. And I'm always shocked at how little the designers and engineers in those companies actually spend time with their end user. You know, I've known of engineers and designers who have never stepped foot in a hospital for the purposes of understanding how their product works. They hear everything second and third and fourth hand. And it's probably no wonder why we have so many medical device and IT products that are frustrating to use and really don't meet the needs of the clinical staff, let alone patients and their families. So taking advantage of your environment and relationships, and really and not being presumptuous, you know, going in with no presuppositions of what it is. And you know what, sometimes you come into with this idea that technology can solve the problem, and you prove yourself otherwise, that maybe there isn't a technological solution to this, and maybe there's other issues that need to be addressed first.
I'm going to assume Samantha has a question that is playing off this idea, and maybe is it playing off this idea, or are you going in a whole new direction? Oh, you're going in a whole new direction. Okay. 1 second then, hang on.
Maybe take the question in the chat because it's more relevant and I can go later.
Yeah, no problem. So there's a question in the chat that's really talking about the notion of the rules-based algorithm. And to me, there's a strong interplay between the fact that, you know, Medly is giving instructions and how you referred to Health Canada approval. So Sophie asked a question just talking about how do we manage issues around misclassification, risk associated with the algorithm and the app giving instructions. And I wonder if the two of you could also just explain how you had to really be sure that you were having a safe device in order to get your Health Canada status.
Heather, did you want to start?
Yeah, so I mean, the algorithm was created to be conservative, and that, you know, in that iterative design, it was pretty crucial to us to not have false negatives, right? So that's the one that is the most concerning. That is, you know, somebody who's actually in trouble. It's the edge cases, if you will, but somebody who's in trouble and the algorithm doesn't see anything. To the case that Sophie has listed, you know, sure, it can happen, right? And this is, I think the key thing is not to sit on an algo and then imagine that it's not a bit of a dynamic process, right? So, for example, as you put in there, when the nurse sees that a patient is alerting because their weight is increased and they're being recommended to take a diuretic, if that's core weight, they're going to alert a couple, you know, probably despite taking the increased dose in diuretic. Those alerts, when they happen, which happen in about 20% of readings, those alerts go to the nurse dashboard, the nurse coordinator dashboard, and they also go to the most responsible physician. And if you see that a patient is alerting, the nurse still contacts the patient, right? So there's still a discussion. If you contact the patient, you find out, and this happens, and some of the Medly coordinators are on the session today. Stella, I think I saw Sarva here as well. But what happens is the patient alerts, you call the patient, and they go, "Doc, I'm feeling really good. I'm actually doing more. I'm not short of breath." And then what happens is the nurse coordinator contacts the MRP and says, "So-and-so's weight is up. I contacted them. They're feeling great. And in fact, they're doing more." And our traditional response would be, "Okay, well, let's get some blood work, including some biomarkers." And we may touch on the AI aspect of Medly, but let's get some blood work, including biomarkers, such as a natriuretic peptide, and then see if we need to recalibrate. Because I can tell you, most of us, yes, some people's weight stays quite stable, but most of us have a certain ebb and flow. In the Canadian way, we generally do gain a bit of weight in the winter, and we generally lose a little bit of weight as the summer coat comes along. And heart failure patients can also have that ebb and flow in terms of feeling well and gaining core weight, or feeling well and actually losing weight because they're doing more, feeling sick and retaining water and gaining weight, or feeling sick and not eating and losing weight. So it's not an absolute of one or the other. And that's why we do recalibrate when we see patients who actually alert. So conservatively built, we don't want to miss false negatives. Alerts go to a dashboard, nurse calls the patient, opportunity to recalibrate. I hope, Sophie, that answers the question.
Thanks, Heather. And Joe, can you talk a little bit about the sort of getting the class 2 recognition and how that has played into your kind of journey to Medly Therapeutics?
Yeah, I mean, one aspect in terms of the quality and the safety of Medly is, and this decision was made about 8 years ago with the leadership of UHN at the time, Bob Bell and Lydia Lee, is that if we were going to do software at this level, it has to be at the same standards of it as industry. So we had to create a quality management system. This was sort of unprecedented for a hospital to be doing this, but I have no regrets doing it despite how painful it was initially. But we had to get certified under a standard, and those of you in the medical device area know it to be ISO 1345. And UHN has been audited twice a year, once internally, one externally, under this standard for the last 8 years. And it requires a level of rigor around the quality assurance and the verification and validation, and a recall mechanism, and all sorts of requirements to eventually apply to Health Canada for a class 2 clearance. And now we're in the process of looking at the FDA as well. I have no regrets in this, because I think it sort of proved that UHN's capabilities and vision for the future, because this was going to be an inevitability. Now that we're looking at a considerable amount of new software and artificial intelligence coming through UHN, this seems to be an opportunity that we can create a lot of great intellectual property that can be eventually commercialized. And I think we're kind of way ahead of the curve from a commercialization. Some part of me wishes we had done it a lot earlier, but nevertheless, it made the maturity and the intellectual property a lot more valuable from a commercial perspective by having all of this done in advance.
And there's a lot of people who are part of Discovery who are kind of early in the pipeline of thinking about things. Is there any kind of advice you would give to them around the questions related to kind of how you plan to get actually that status early in their thinking that might be helpful? And then I'll come to you, Sophie, just on this thread. Joe.
It's something that, in fact, we've been talking a lot about at UHN Research about if you follow a perfectly linear path, you're going to get stuck and you're going to hit those chasms. And so I think UHN has enough experience and depth now to be thinking about these scaling issues, the evidence issues, the technology quality and assurance issues much more early, and that will take, actually, it should be embraced. I know that a lot of researchers have a ton of things to do, but they shouldn't be scared off by the path towards commercialization, even though that may seem like it's a lot more late stage. I would like to think that we can do what other programs have been doing, and if there is one exemplar out there, I often think about the Stanford program, where the business school and the design school and the basic scientists tend to be working together at early stages. And I'm hoping we can do a lot more of that at UHN as well.
Are there any reflections from your perspective on that topic?
Yeah, no, I would agree. I think Joe's a little more savvy in the space than I am, and I have found the journey to be both exhilarating and terrifying. It's probably how I would describe it. And, me and CC, the patient in cardiogenic shock, and I'm pretty calm, but some of these interactions with venture capital and just it's quite something. So, I think that the TDC is there to help. The commercialization group is there to help us. And I think Joe's right. We shouldn't be afraid. And you just never know when an idea, incubating with the right group of people can do something that, again, changes. And for me, the driver's always been about changing the patient journey. So I think Joe's quite right.
All right, let's maybe turn to Samantha to unmute herself, and I turn the floor to you.
Awesome. Yeah, I was just curious, you've alluded to a lot of times that there were a bunch of challenges and setbacks along the way, which I can imagine is very true when you're working with a system that both has like the patient interaction component, the software component, the system component on the physician side. And there's a lot of moving pieces. I was wondering if you could share a bit more about the kinds of challenges you've experienced and that sort of thing.
Yeah, one of my funnest challenges was when we were doing the initial trial and we were on a BlackBerry device. One of the most important questions that we ask a patient is whether or not their defibrillator has fired. Because if your defibrillator is fired, obviously the concern is that you've had an aborted sudden cardiac death and you're probably at high risk for another event. And we had the way that we had it was a yes, no, but the buttons on the BlackBerry were literally right beside each other. And I remember because I was on holidays in Bermuda and I racked up a $700 Rogers bill calling all these patients because their defibrillators had gone off. And it was just because, if, as the expression goes, fat fingers, tiny keys, and they were pressing the wrong button. And we hadn't built in at that point. Are you sure you want to answer that? And so it was, again, you often, the lessons you learn are when you have a failure, right? And you're like, well, no, we got to figure out how to change that because nobody in their right mind is going to want to be answering or, doing 30 phone calls on a Saturday because somebody said their defibrillator has gone off, right? And having to recognize that outside of our clinic environment, when you're launching something like this, we have to make sure that the clinician side of it too can manage whatever that workload was. So that's still one of my favorite stories of figuring out something that had gone wrong. But there have been others, and I think we've really grown as a team, and Joe and I have been together on this journey for some time, and we've seen other members of the team who have gone on to other positions and success, and we've continued with this because we're passionate and committed to it. So despite some of those challenges, anyway, I don't know, Joe, if you have a favorite story, but that's still my favorite.
No, I mean, there are situations where I've actually been very pleased with how the team has reacted about when there are technology failures, and quite honestly, there have been few technology failures, and I have to give the team credit for that, and the fact that we have this quality management system, which is supposed to be for that very reason. I think the tough thing is when you're working at this level, the amount of evidence generation. I respect Heather a lot that, unlike a lot of digital health companies, we can't go around making a lot of claims that isn't backed up by evidence. And so the process is long and hard and expensive and rigorous. And a lot of people don't have the appetite for that. And I'm really glad that we put in the hard work, and as well as, a lot of student theses, and a lot of people coming and going over the course of the last 10 years. And it shouldn't be surprising that it takes 10 years to build something out like this. And we have a lot of way to go as well.
Yeah, it's the idea that for the last 10 years, every Saturday and Sunday morning, over my morning coffee, I manage Medly. And, I still have about, I think, 250 or 300 patients of the 800 patients that are live on Medly. There's over 1,600 that have gone through. There's 800 currently that are live, not just alive, but live on Medly. And I follow still, a few hundred. And part of the reason for that is I'm a little touched, but the other reason, I think, the more important reason, is you want to be in the trenches, seeing exactly what's happening from the patient and the messaging and the response, and understanding it, because it can always be better. We can always improve it, and I think that you don't want to be distant from it. You still want to, have your hands. We still want to have your hands in it.
One of the things that strikes me is, there's actually a question in here from Sheila. She's asking really around, the whole dynamics of the digital divide and gaps in equity and access. So she's asking particularly about, making sure that people have a data plan. But can the two of you kind of reflect on and Joe, you spoke about for older patients, but can you talk about how that kind of mindset has influenced the shape of Medly over the years and where you are?
Yeah, I think when we started, everybody got what's known as the Cadillac version. So a phone, cuff, scale, all Bluetooth enabled as the Medly package. And then it became obvious, just with smartphone penetration across many age ranges, that in addition to patients not wanting to have two phones, that there was all kinds of varieties of options, right? Maybe an Android or iOS system. They may or may not have a cuff or a scale. It may be Bluetooth enabled or not. And as is always the case, you need to be able to manage any one of these possible scenarios. And I think Joe and his team did an amazing job on this, as opposed to saying what some technology companies have done, which is you use our system and only our system. Instead, Joe's team has said, listen, doesn't matter what you bring, we will complete you with what you need, so that you can be managed and followed on Medly. And we have a paper that's coming up at the European Society of Cardiology heart failure that actually is looking at quintiles of marginalization. So residential instability, material deprivation, ethnicity, dependency. And what we see is this incredible, almost split across multiple of these domains, where we actually are meeting patient groups that have markers of increased marginalization. I think that is sort of having created a solution that it actually doesn't matter what you bring to the table. We can make you whole with what we give you. And as one of our previous students, Chris Boudou, showed, it is cost effective, whether or not you get the whole kit or only part of the kit. So it's a great question. And I think if we're going to meet some of the challenges that exist in healthcare, and that's global, not just in the Canadian sphere. We have to be able to make it available to all, including those who are low income. And there's a Sahar who did her PhD, is been working on looking at this in Uganda, which is a slightly changed DSMS text-based system using the algorithm, and also up in Winnebago Area Health Authority, up north in the Cree communities along James and Hudson Bay. So I think one huge piece is that we're not out to please the 1%. We really are out to create a solution that can improve care, regardless of who you are.
And I'm really pleased that the company will be threading this needle as well. Like they realize that it's not in anyone's interest to create a chasm where the ability to pay is going to determine whether or not you can participate. So that business model is being extended into the company. And we're really pleased that everybody saw this as a necessity. It's not a nice to have.
There's a couple questions in the chat about IP. So I'll turn to you, Joe. So there's a question that says the algorithm itself seems worthy of its own IP. Can you just talk about that space between the IP for the company, the device, the
Absolutely, yeah.
Thanks.
So the algorithm and the way we did IP, we did this very much like a modular system. So the platform, the heart failure algorithm, we have new modules for diabetes, mental health, etc. And we have a new disclosure for the artificial intelligence version of the algorithm, the machine learning version of the algorithm. And it came to a discussion with the company for licensing it, what is on the roadmap for them, and so they're licensing all of those components, and we will continue to modularize. So if there's new innovations that come through, that's related to Medly or otherwise, that might be opportunities for licensing through the new company.
Thanks. That's great. I hope that answers. I saw Sophie also was asking around the same thing. So I'm going to turn to Daniel's question. Daniel, do you dare speak, or do you want me to read your question? No? I figured somebody might want to talk, but no? Okay. So obviously we're at the stage where Medly...
Sorry, Anne.
Oh,
I think Daniel's unmuted, so.
Oh,
Yeah,
good. Go.
I wasn't
Perfect.
able to unmute myself. Yeah, so
Okay.
So this is a great system, and with systems like this, I was always wondering, how do you go about making sure clinics and hospitals adopt this system? Especially, I feel always with something digital like this, where patients are interacting digitally. I don't know how this seems like it might be a more new thing away from the traditional. So how do you go about helping making sure this is adopted? And is there an approach you've had up until now? And do you have an approach going into the future? That's just what I was wondering.
So I can say from an engineering perspective is, finding that clinical champion is super important. And I've been lucky to have worked with many UHN, but I get the sense sometimes of a clinician scientist who's not really up for it. So I'll give you an anecdote of one clinician scientist, not to be named, who said to me, Joe, if this takes me 30 seconds longer than it is taking me to do it now, I'm not doing it. 30 seconds, right? That was the tolerance. And so I kind of knew that this was not going to be a collaborator that, willing to spend the time or change the way they practice medicine. Whereas with Heather, everything was on the table. The fact that she led us into her clinic and scrutinized the way her clinic operates, because it was important for us to understand the context of the use of the technology. That's a big ask, and there's not many clinician scientists who would allow that, or would not only allow it, but Heather leaned into it. So, you know, and that's what you're looking for. Now, are there a lot of Heather Rosses around? No, but I mean, there are people who are with you on this journey for building a better experience, both for the clinicians and the patients. So that's what we often look for. And I'll leave it to Heather to talk about how we get it to clinics beyond UHN.
Yeah, and you know, that hasn't been a completely, it's definitely not been an easy path, and it has had some challenges. So we had a couple of really great early adopters, Stephanie Poon up at Sunnybrook, you know, really liked the idea and got involved very early. We have tried and with the ministry early on and got very close when Bob Bell was the deputy health minister, and then there was a change in government, and we sort of had to start over again. So we've had to, I have to say that that's been a really interesting journey as well, trying to figure out how to get this to a place where hospitals and clinics adopt it. So early adopters and people who are interested in disruptive technology or things that might change how care is delivered, really important to get things going. We were then very lucky that you know, the ministry opted to go to quality-based procedures, or QBP, which is a change in the way funding is actually provided for heart failure care. So normally you get a bundle of money for every patient who's admitted for heart failure, but that money doesn't extend anything past the hospital stay. And they created this idea that with a no-loss provision, you would get paid that bundle based on 2019, 2020 hospitalization rates. And if you could do something to lower hospitalization or shorten length of stay and reduce costs, whatever that delta was, you would be allowed to use that money to reinvest in your solution. And we put forward an application, and we're one of 6 in the province that was awarded. And for us, it's involved Medly as the technology solution. There's other pieces to it, but Medly is the technology solution. And now that's being used at Women's College and Sunnybrook also put Medly in, and they were also selected. So you can start to see how the technology then gets into the hands of the clinic and the hospital. We've had some funding awarded through OH in Simcoe area and up in Winnebago Area Health Authority. And so slowly we are starting to see the technology get adopted. But I think it's having those champions who are really interested. And I guess I come back to that classic definition of, well, you know what the definition is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different outcome. We haven't been able to change heart failure hospitalization rates in the time that I have been in practice here, which is a long time. So we have to think differently about what that patient journey is, and understanding that patient journey. Each patient is individual. Each patient follows their own journey, and we have to figure out how to work with that, which I think Medly does by creating this on-demand style of care instead of waiting for, you know, their booked clinic or when they're able to be seen. So I think, you know, getting the early adopters, people that recognize that we have to do something differently, and then supporting them as much as we can across the Medly journey has helped us a lot getting it into the clinics.
And I think, Daniel, the thing you do need to remember, though, is it's really starts bottom up with patients and the clinicians. You get yourself into a lot of trouble if you try to do it top down, like working at the senior levels, the technology side. You've got to get that buy-in from the people who are the end users. And we've been bitten by that in the past, in that, you know, you can have a CEO of a hospital really enthusiastic about an idea, but if that clinic is not engaged or doesn't see the value, then it's not going to happen.
And there's a very nice bottom up, but I think it's really a top down comment from a Medly user in the chat about the value Medly in her care. So I think I'm going to say it's a top down, because the patient should always be at the top. So one of the things I wondered to ask both of you, I mean, do you think of yourselves as inventors, and just that learning journey for you? I wonder if like there's sort of a moment that, you know, maybe not a messy moment, but a moment where you kind of like were thinking about, if I'd only known, because a lot of people here are earlier in their stage. So put your inventor hat on and give us some early advice.
Well, you know, I was trained as an engineer 30 years ago, and I always looked to, I think it's every engineer's dream is that whatever they build, it get used far and wide. Yes, I'm a professor. Yes, I write papers and get grants, but to me, those were all means to an end. I think the biggest satisfaction is seeing, and this group out here, the team here, whenever we hear anecdotes about a patient or from the clinic that, you know, Medly saved a patient the other day, it's a huge thrill to be, you know, a couple of steps removed from the clinic, but still having that impact at scale. And so, you know, this is part of the journey, is the commercialization. And, you know, Inventor of the Year was a huge honor for me personally, only because I know the incredible people at UHN who's gotten it before, and it's been a terrific honor. But in the end, the stuff that really makes it for an engineer is to see their technology in daily use and contributing and making a positive impact.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just amplify that. Again, just changing the patient's journey, which you just haven't been able to do, and having patients tell you that it matters and that it makes a difference. That's what matters. And I think if you're centered in that, and obviously in healthcare, to me, I'm a clinician, so that's where I'm centered. I'm centered by managing my patients and how to manage my patients better. I still kind of pinch me because I guess I don't, you know, sorry, I'm going to say it out loud. I don't think of myself as an inventor. I think what we've done is I mean, I guess I'm going to say the word creation, which means it's an invention, but it still feels mostly like we've embarked on a journey to change care for patients. And if that's an invention or a creation, great. But still, the goal is to change the lived experience. You know, don't want to ever stop doing that.
And I wonder, one of the things, like obviously the two of you come from different sides of the equation and there's a partnership there, but, you know, where did you go for mentorship? Because I know, and you've mentioned, you know, all of the folks that have supported, but I think, you know, for a lot of our participants, kind of thinking about where do I get good advice and what is the kind of advice I should get. So could you both reflect a little bit maybe on mentorship and advisors that have been critical to complement the two of you in your work?
Yeah, I'll go first with that. So in medicine, there's always the traditional mentorship, which I've been very lucky to have, which are, you know, senior people within the field of medicine who've been helpful to make introductions, open doors, and provide guidance. Having said that, the most important mentor to me over the last really 15 years has been somebody who is a serial entrepreneur and in the private sector and ran a very large Canadian company while doing serial entrepreneurship, startup and investing and venture capital style investing. And his mentorship over this time has been incredible and unexpected, and just, you know, the mentorship started around leadership as I had moved into some leadership roles, and then as Medly started to grow into this potential of where we are now, he has provided tremendous mentorship. So really unusual for somebody in medicine to have such strong mentorship in the business side outside of the institution and the university. And I think it's been incredibly valuable to me.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say UHN in general I've been afforded so many informal mentors. and lots of lessons. UHN, I mean, reflecting on my years here, it's an incredible organization, and the level of latitude that it's given me. And my previous boss, Tony Easty, who's also an engineer, he let me both succeed and fail on my own. And I like to think that UHN is incredibly supportive as long as you don't ask them for money, right? And it is an organization that can allow you to, I mean, nobody asked us to do this. Nobody asked us to create the Healthcare Human Factors Group. And the fact that these things were created over time and it wasn't in a strategic plan or anything is incredible. And it shows the level of creativity at UHN. I think on the business side, I mean, the benefactor of my chair, Greg Wolfond, I've learned a lot recently in recent years from him as a successful entrepreneur. And I think really what I see in his personality and also in our CEO of the startup, Tracy Dodenhoff, is you got to have optimism. You've got to stay positive that what you're doing is the right thing. It's so easy to get discouraged. And the fact that these people, especially Greg with 5 exits that he's had, it's amazing how optimistic he is, regardless of how many setbacks he's had over the course of his professional and business career.
Awesome. Thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Meg, who's got his hands up. And if anybody else has a question, we've got maybe time for one more after that.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Great. And so I guess my question maybe is a high level on the idea of you have a shared vision between both of you. I mean, it's amazing, but in terms of actually implementing that in this long, daunting road of medical technology adoption, like I'm sure you've heard a lot of ideas or other people's opinions on your idea. How do you kind of keep the same vision and clarity despite maybe all this external noise, maybe internal doubt? Because this is a long process. It's not like an overnight thing. So I don't know, like how, I guess thoughts around that idea. Whether people are like, you should build up its complexity or you should oversimplify it a bit more. Just overall thoughts there would be really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, well, sure. We've heard all kinds of things over the years. It makes me smile. I'm sure it probably makes Joe smile, given all the things we've heard about. You should spin up. You shouldn't spin up. You should spin up. You should sit. You shouldn't. You should. You shouldn't. You should. And also, I think Joe said it. You do need to remain optimistic. Again, I know I've said it, but for me, it's pretty easy to remain optimistic or to remain driven. Maybe is the better word, Meg. To remain driven when you're recognize the patient journey that you're trying to change, right? So, my dad had heart failure, and you watch it, and you know that you should be able to do a better job, right? So, many people, as you know, are touched in some way by heart failure. So, and that's just this disease. There are so many other diseases that you could similarly describe that have an impact. So I think it's maintaining the drive through the adversity, and having a partner in crime is very helpful, because by and large, I don't think Joe and I have been miserably down at the same time. I think we've managed to offset each other quite well that way. So having a real partner in crime on it is hugely helpful.
I think the only other thing I would add, Meg, is that you can't let local factors impact your vision or the framing of what you're doing. Because, I'm just suggesting that Ontario might not be the best place to be doing this. I'm just saying, right? That maybe the way technology is viewed, the circumstances of our health system in Ontario. And so you've got to really, and I mean, UHN is a global organization, and you have to look at it in those terms. And we wouldn't be the first to have to get external validation before being recognized in Ontario. And I know a lot of companies have been faced with that, and it's unfortunate. But but it's not as if we're giving up locally, but you hear a lot of noise locally. But it's not as if Ontario is like an exemplar for the adoption of advanced digital health and digital therapeutics. And so sometimes I have to keep that in mind, knowing about what's going on in Germany, which is huge in digital therapeutics, what's going on in parts of the United States, the level of willingness to experiment. Unfortunately, we don't always see that in Ontario, but I don't want to be totally down and discouraged by it either.
All right. May I ask you, as you think about our Echo Discovery group, who are all sort of budding entrepreneurs, perhaps, or hopeful entrepreneurs, or early optimistic potential entrepreneurs, let's use different terms. What would be your best advice to all of them? Kind of your snapshot advice.
Heather, do you want to suggest something?
Yeah, no, I think just looking back, having a really good problem that you need to solve, having a really good team who's going to support, having mentorship. I think those would probably be the three things. And I have to say, I backed into it. Right? I really backed into it, but I feel like I've had all three, which has been incredible.
It's really helpful to have a clinician champion like Heather by your side with a lot of tenacity and drive. And I would also say, I mean, especially for the engineering types who you probably didn't study this in school, but I happen to do health services research. And I mean, I would start gathering evidence to support your technology sooner than later. It's not something that is wired into us. And you know what, you may not have the expertise, and that's why you collaborate. And so you find yourself someone to collaborate with on developing the evidence base for your technology. That's super important in healthcare. People aren't going to just trust you on it.
Amazing. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Heather, on behalf of everyone. So for today, that'll close off our fireside chat. Thank you to everybody for joining us on the line, but honestly, a huge thanks to Heather and Joe for sharing the highs and the frustrations, and also some of that secret sauce that has become and is now becoming Medly Therapeutics. And we will look forward to hearing about the great success to come next. So that's it for today. I don't think I have any other housekeeping tasks, but Saror will tell us if I have any other housekeeping tasks. But huge thanks on behalf of everyone. Also excited that we had some Medly patients in the crowd who gave their from the top perspectives. And I think for Echo Discovery folks, it's nice for you to know that there's patients that are part of the storyline at every step of the way, even at this point in the journey. So I'll close it off there. And thanks to our presenters, our guests, and to everybody who joined us. Have a great week.